Hey guys, Mr. Milton here. Today we are finishing up our quadratic chapter by talking about choosing your method. At the end of this video, you should be able to choose the appropriate method to solve a given quadratic and explain why it's appropriate. And you should be able to solve a quadratic using any method. Okay, in this lesson, we will review all 5 methods. I think there's 5. For solving a quadratic and look at when it's most appropriate and when it's least appropriate to use each method. Okay. For all the problems, there's more than one method that will work. And as long as your work matches your method you've chosen, you'll be fine. So, method 1 is graphing. Remember, we solved by graphing. We found the axis of symmetry, x equals opposite b over 2a. We plugged it in to find y, to find the y value of the vertex, made a table, all that good stuff, graphed, and then, skipping steps, our solution was on the x-axis. Alright, this method though should only be used when I ask you to use it. It's a long process and many of the times the solutions don't cross, I'll just say, nice points, okay? They don't cross points that are whole numbers and easy to see. The second method, square roots. Okay, this method should only be used if b is 0. This can't be used if b is not equal to 0. So in a problem like, 4x squared equals 25, this is a perfect problem to use square roots. Or, let's say 4x squared minus 25 equals 0. So you will notice that b is a 0 value, and so this is an equation that we probably want to use square roots for. Okay, our third method was completing the square. Okay, now completing the square. This method is best used when b is even. Okay, relatively large. And it should only be used when a equals 1. Okay. This should not be used when b is odd or when a does not equal 1. Okay, remember, because one of the things that we had to do to complete the square, if you remember, we had x squared plus b x plus equals negative c plus. Okay, so to fill in this blank, we did b divided by 2 squared. Okay, if b is an odd number, and that means we'd have to square a decimal, and it would make our numbers not very nice. So when b is even, then using completing the square is pretty good. Now, a is a whole different story. If a is not 1, you don't use complete the square, okay? All right, fourth method was factoring. Okay, this method should be used when you're able to find the factors. Okay, if you can find 2 numbers, remember we did our Xbox method. If you can find 2 numbers that multiply to give you C and add to give you B, then that's when you do it. Okay, I always say if after 10 seconds you don't have those 2 numbers, then you should go on to a different method because it's not saving you very much time. So if you can't find the factors, use a different method. Okay. Give yourself, like I said, 10 to 15 seconds. If you can't find those factors, then go to something else, whether it be completing the square or the final one, quadratic formula. Okay. Now the quadratic formula is pretty long. X equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, that's the quadratic formula. This method should be used whenever a is not equal to 1, unless b equals 0. If b equals 0, then you can use square roots. Okay, but whenever a is not equal to 1, it makes factoring more difficult, it makes completing the square way more difficult, and so quadratic formula probably is the way to go there. Okay, this method should be used also whenever the other methods don't work. Okay, the quadratic formula will always work. Okay, so there's never a time where this method won't work. However, it is one of the most time consuming and has the biggest chance for error. Okay, a lot of computation there. So if you can find a different route, then do those first. Now, if all else fails, quadratic formula comes in, okay? Alright. Alright, so on the back side here, we are not solving these problems, alright? We are just looking at the problems and choosing which method that we will want to use, okay? On a test, I might tell you to solve it. You've seen it on the quiz. I've said, hey, choose which method to use and then solve and explain why. We're just going to say what method to use and then why. Okay, so for this problem, which method would you choose? I'm noticing at the beginning that A is 5 and there's no GCF. So I would probably choose a quadratic formula. Okay, I could tell you all the things I wouldn't do. I wouldn't graph. Just graphing, I won't probably go through that for the rest of these. Graphing is off the table. Unless they tell me I have to graph, I'm not going to choose it. Okay. Can't use square roots because there's a b value. I won't use completing the square because a is not 1. I won't use factoring again because a is not 1. And so I'd use the quadratic formula. A doesn't equal 1 and b doesn't equal 0. Okay. The other method that you could use factoring. Factoring will work, I believe. Remember, you can do your X box, find two numbers that multiply to give you negative 60 and add to give you negative 8. What would those numbers be? See, and that's why I didn't choose to do that method. 4 times something. Alright, so that's how you could do it. And then you'd plug it into the box. And first term, first box, last term, last box. Okay, but like I said, you could do that. It would take longer. Number 2, method chosen. Okay. Not square roots because there's a b value. Not completing the square because b is odd. So I would choose factoring here. Okay, and here I'm trying to find two numbers that multiply. I'll say factors are easy. Okay, because I can see what numbers they're going to be. Okay. So I'm trying to find two numbers that multiply to give me negative 14 and add to give me 5, and so those two numbers would be 7 and negative 2. Done. Okay, so I could do all my other stuff. Other thing that works, quadratic formula. Quadratic formula always works here. Completing the square would work, but it would be a decimal, so we wouldn't choose that. So quadratic formula works. All right. Number 3. I noticed right away that there's no b value, so I'm going to use square roots. Okay. That would probably be my way. B equals 0. Okay, the other thing that you could do, you could factor. I wouldn't complete the square. You could always do quadratic formula. Okay. Number 4, we see that a is 1. I'm going to complete the square here. Number 4 makes sense to complete the square because we have pretty large value here. We can find half of b. B is even. B is even. Large C. We're all good for that. Other method that you could use, I would say that factoring isn't something that you want to use here. Trying to find two numbers that multiply give you 407. There's a possibility that there's a lot of options there. Okay, so I would say quadratic formula. Now again, I say I wouldn't do factoring because the number's big, but if you can find those two numbers, I don't know. Maybe you have it in your mind that you can find those pretty quickly. You could do factoring. All right. Final one here for number 5. You tell me. You bring this in complete. Let's do number 6 together. So number 6, first thing that you should notice, hopefully, is that there's no b value. And so I would probably try to use square roots here. Okay, because there's no b value, then it should be pretty simple to try to solve that way. B equals 0. Okay. Other methods, you could use quadratic formula. Wouldn't do completing the square, b is 0. Wouldn't do factoring because we have a as something else. So it's just a quadratic formula, square root of quadratic formula. Okay, so here we're just talking about what method to use. Okay, if you need review on any of the other methods, the videos are posted. Make sure you look those up. Make sure you can create some practice problems, even problems that you're sure of the answer in a different method. So if you're really good at completing the square, you can complete the square for a problem and then go through and then try to solve that same problem by factoring. Okay, so if you need extra skill work with that, do those. But this section, these notes were focused on why to choose a method. Okay, all right, see you.